Hey there, my name is Chris Acton with Acton Creative, and this is A Handwoven Experience, episode 70. And in this episode, I'm going to answer the question, does the spacing of your read have to match the spacing in your project? But before we answer that burning question, let's make sure you understand the players here. So this is the warp of my project. These are all the warp yarns that are going to go into the loom for my project. This here is my reed. The reed is a piece that fits into your beater bar, which is the moving part of the loom. Now, when you talk about reeds, you are talking about dents. Let me make sure you understand what a dent is. So my reed is made up of a whole bunch of evenly spaced dividers here as part of the reed. So these are called dents, the actual spaces in between. If I took my measuring tape here and I put it up like this is called an 8-dent reed. I would count 8 spaces in my inch right here. So ultimately, circling back to our question, the question is, does the amount of dents in the reed have to match the ends per inch, the EPI of your project? And thankfully, my friends, no, it does not have to match. Not at all. Because you would have to own a heck of a lot of reeds then for each individual project that you want to do on your loom. So if it doesn't have to match, what do you do? Right? It's a good question. So here I have an 8-dent reed, yet my project here is set at 16 ends per inch. So what I plan to do is I'm going to take 2 warp yarns and put them through each of the dents as I slay my reed here. If you have something that doesn't, where the math isn't quite so nice, the goal is just to make sure they're as evenly spaced as possible. So let's say my project was a 10 ends per inch and I was using my 8-dent reed. I would simply double up on 2 of my yarns in that inch. I might do 2 yarns at the first part and then somewhere in the middle. So they're just evenly spread out throughout your reed. So that's how you compensate for not always having the same dent reed as you do ends per inch of your project. Now, I've got a couple things for you to keep in mind as you're determining how you want to tackle this. First of all, think about the size of your warp yarn. Do you have something that's nice and fat? You might want to make sure then that your reed has enough space in each of the dents. You want to make sure that your warp yarn is always moving smoothly through the reed. So just make sure it's got enough room, that's not kind of wedged in there. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Keep in mind the size of your warp yarn. Secondly, the style of your warp yarn. Sometimes you'll find a fiber that's real sticky, and in that case, you might be better suited to use a reed that has more dents, that's closer together. So maybe you have 12 dents in a reed, and that way you can separate your yarns a little bit more so they don't stick quite as much, because that will help when you get to the weaving part of the equation. So ultimately, you just have to keep in mind that your goal as you're slaying your reed is to spread out your warp yarns as evenly as possible and make sure they're moving smoothly through the reed. That's really what you're looking for. So whether you're working with an 8-dent reed, a 12-dent reed, whatever kind of reed you have, you can make pretty much any project, any spacing for your warp yarns work with that reed. Just keep a couple of those things in mind and it'll be smooth sailing from there. So I hope that helps as you're planning your next project. You're thinking about, this is how I'm going to space my project and here's how I'm going to work it into my specific sized reed. All right, friends. Go forth and weave all kinds of amazing things. And hopefully as you're sitting there slaying the reed, you'll be thinking, okay, I got this, no problem. All right, have a great week and happy weaving.